Well, I'm going to talk about the Schlieffen Plan. The Germany commanders realized that if war came, they had to face two enemies at the same time, France to the west and Russia to the east. They faced two risks. The first one was that Russia would be slow to mobilize its troops to the front of the war. It would take it 3 whole weeks. And the second one was that Britain had a treaty with Belgium in which both of them would keep a neutral position in war, and Britain would go to help Belgium if it was attacked or invaded. Well, according to the Schlieffen Plan, the left wing of Germany would attack France, as it was expected, in the line from Metz to Switzerland. Meanwhile, the right wing of Germany would sweep round Belgium, taking France by surprise, cross northern France, capture Paris, and attack France from behind. So France would be defeated, and Germany would only have to defeat and invade Russia.
The Germans advanced in 1914. The beginning of the war was when the German troops invaded Belgium, and their right wing went through Belgium and France in order to reach Paris, but things went wrong, and the Belgians were more resistant than expected, and this delayed the Germans' advance. As Britain kept their treaty with Belgium, they sent the BEF, which was the British Expeditionary Force, and when they attacked the Germans, they forced their lines of advance to the east of Paris, which wasn't planned. At this point, Britain and France counterattacked, and they stopped the Germans' advance and pushed them back.
Well, the trench warfare. The reason why the war was fought from trenches was that before the war, European countries had developed heavy industries. The factories now creating iron, steel, and chemicals provided the materials for the development of the weapons. There were three kinds of weapons used during the war, which were the rifle, which was issued to every soldier, the mortar, which could lob down shells within half a mile, the heavy guns, which were used to soften the enemy, and the machine guns, which could kill with great efficiency. Well, during the war, the only safe place was in a trench dug in the ground. Every soldier carried tools to make ducks, as regards their armies, also to fight the enemy. In front of each trench were coils of barbed wire to stop attacking soldiers. And the land left between the trenches was called no man lands.
About tactics, the only method of attack on both sides was to pound the enemy trenches and also to send the soldiers towards the enemy lines, and this caused thousands of lives.
Well, there were two new inventions which were used to defeat the enemy. The first one was poisonous gas, which was used to drive enemies away. And soon both sides learned to use it, and its effect was horrific. As regards tanks were a new invention which could end the deadlock of the enemy, but they were primitive in design.
Then we have the 5 dates in which the main events of the First World War took place. And we have at first 1914 at the Battle of Marne in which both sides or troops take trench positions. In 1915, the German attacks at Ypres, in which gas was used for first. In 1916, the German attacks on the French. In 1917, the entry of USA or the American troops at the war on the Allied side. The British attack at Arras, the French attacks, and an advance on German defenses. And then we have 1918, in which Russia abandoned the war. Britain and France combined and were under one supreme commander, and the American troops arrived, and that was the Germans' retreat.
There was, as regards the home front, there was a huge difference between life in the trenches and life back at Britain. The First World War was fought on many fronts: land, sea, air. The soldiers had to get used to terrible living conditions under the trenches, and the civilians back in Britain had really a little idea of what was happening in the front. As regards conscription was not started until 1916. Every man who went to work were volunteers, and they were really pushed to join the army. They went under a lot of pressure to the war. As regards women at work, before the war, women had been regarded as incapable of doing many jobs. When the war broke out, they joined a lot of jobs which were previously done by men, such as taxis, driving taxis, buses, in armed factories. As regards food supply was, Europe had to send food supply to its people. When the war started, food supply was interrupted, so the people began to suffer, mainly in Germany and in Austria. They started to, they starved during the war. The only ones who get an economic advantage of the war were the owners of farm supplies, of farms supplying the armies for the war.
The war at sea. As soon as the war began, the British Navy blocked all German ports and cut off supplies to Germany. So that 1917 and 1918 winter was called the turnip winter, because turnips were almost all that German people had to eat. When a German cruiser could escape from the British fleet and reach Constantinople, Turkey entered the war on Germany's side, and after then many British ships were sunk. While the British fleet tried to tempt the Germans to leave their bases, the Germans tried to lure the British out of Scapa, Flow and Rosyth. From 1915 onwards, the Germans began to use submarines, which were called U-boats, in order to sink everything or every ship. And this caused over 1,000 of Americans were killed, and this produced anti-German feeling in the USA. The Germans knew that it was almost impossible to get on the entire British fleet, but they hoped to lure them into a type of submarines. So they met at the Battle of Jutland, and when both fleets returned, the British losses were 14 ships and 6,000 men, while the German losses were 11 ships and 2,500 men. So when the Germans returned, they had to sink almost everything on high seas, and they succeeded because the British ships were sunk in large numbers. So the Prime Minister brought a change in tactics and introduced the convoy system, in which all the merchant ships which sailed should be escorted by fast destroyers.
The war in the air, airplanes were still new inventions in 1914 when the war broke down. At first, they were used for reconnaissance. They could go to the enemy's field and take photographs of what they were doing. Then fighter planes were constructed, designed and built. They carried bombs and they could kill people. The Royal Flying Corps was the basis of the Royal Air Force in 1918. The airships were faster and could carry more arms than airplanes. Both sides learned a great deal about aircraft. They were faster and they could do more damage than an airplane. While as regards the Eastern Front, Russia fell back on the Eastern Front. The Germans stopped the Russian advance at Tannenberg and the Masurian Lakes. In 1915, German and Austrian troops, both of them, advanced steadily. The Russian soldiers were short of guns, ammunition, supplies, foods, and they were incompetent under the rules of the Tsar. In January 1917, there was a revolution, and in March 1918, the German signed a treaty of peace with Russia, and Germany gained some Russian land. Now Germany could go to put all its strength to the Western Front.
All through the summer of 1918, the Germans attacked the Allied trenches, but then the Allies regrouped and stopped the German advance. When the first American troops arrived, as I already said, the Allies combined under one supreme control, who was Marshal Foch, and they counterattacked. At that time, tanks were used in large numbers. But at the same time, there were riots and revolution because of the starving people in Germany. And with this chaos, the war ended on November the 11th of 1918. This is the last slide, and here we have 4 reasons why Germany lost the war. The first one is that the Schlieffen Plan failed, and the Germans had to fight with 2 countries at once. The second one, the arrival of the Americans. The third reason, the naval blockade, because the shortages of raw material weakened the German industry. And the last one, the development of the tank, because the Germans were not successful in developing a tank on their own.